a lot of people were struggling in this role, and I think partially it was because they didn't know what to expect.
The engineering manager doesn't code as much or at all.
Sometimes simple is better than clever.
It's much more management, and like you have to be much more structured and organized and be able to communicate very well with people.
Tell about your problem, and they ask you about what do you think you should do about it, and you say, well, I should probably do this and this. Well, just do it. Okay, yeah. Here is $100. Thank you. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm very well, thanks. Like a little bit early for me, but like that's the part of it because I have just freshly born baby girl, so I have to find the time to do this together with you.
Congratulations, and thank you that even with those obstacles, fortunate obstacles, but you were able to find some time to be with us. So today we have Michal Janoušek, who is a consultant and the owner and the founder of the company PureBrew. Spent nearly 20 years in the tech industry, in the software industry, worked in a variety of different businesses, and I think you entered Scala, or been in the world of Scala while it was on its bigger growth in 2010, 2012. You worked with a bunch of different companies. Now you own your own company, and I think what is interesting for our listeners or viewers is your path from from this individual contributor to team leader's role to engineering manager, and finally to manager of managers, or managers of various teams, several different teams, and also this angle of having your own founding your own consulting agencies. Because if someone asked me about, look, Paweł, what do I need to do if I want to be entrepreneur in software, if I want to found my own company? I would say that, you probably got to, it's not for some people it works that way, but I think that it's good to work somewhere. And even it's better to work at least 2-3 different places. And one of them would be, it doesn't have to be long, but one of them have to be like you mentioned at the very beginning, a small company when you have to do everything yourself, because it teaches you, all those things that need to be done in a company. Then there is this thing, your episode in a big corporate world is also interesting because you won't gonna learn a lot about how to run the company, because it's a completely different setting, right? You probably do a small piece of the entire process or something like that, but it learns it can teach you something, and you can learn about how big companies work, what are the incentives, how decisions are being made, who is making them. So that's an interesting thing. And I liked also this idea, your history, part of your history when you worked at Cake Solution, because Cake Solution was, a consulting agency, and they work with companies, big and small. And they were like, I worked with Cake Solutions. We had the episode together. I didn't work directly for them, but we were doing the project together. And, I always admired Cake Solutions. And Guy Remond, as the CEO, I haven't read a book he wrote sometime back in the day, and I like their approach to doing consulting and the software engineering work. So it was like, I'm not sure if that was something that is groundbreaking in terms of the entire world, but for me it was definitely a good learning point in terms of how you do consultancy.
Yeah, definitely I'm so grateful to Guy and for this opportunity which I have had. Definitely at the time when I was at Cake, I really didn't have that many experience, and I was questioning for some things being done in a certain way. But now where I am right now, after some more years of experience running my own business, I respect that even more than when I was in it, and I liked it very much, and generally everything worked so well, the quality of the people and stuff which we were doing, it was a magic formula. I'm still very close with the CTO, Jan Macháček.
Right.
He's just recently released a game, it's called Copy.
Copy.
One other
you gotta check it. Check it out.
It's this coordination. It's coffee shop, and like you have to serve people, and I think like they have a port for Xbox,
Wow.
for PC, and like they have some agency. It's dream on a stake. So like they have been working on this for last 2 or 3 years with another like ex-Cake alumni.
Wonderful.
So,
yeah, great story. I mean, like, what a transition, from consulting in an enterprise world, doing streaming, I don't know, event-based system, moving to the game industry. Industry is difficult. I know I have some friends that work there, and it's brutal there. It's like the competition. It's different industry.
yeah. It's really funny. Like it's not like talking about it at some point in time. I think like they started like more than 2 years ago, and I have heard these ideas and been shown like this different kind of games. But then like when it got closer to release, like it changed over the course.
Right.
Like the type of the game, like from 3D to like 2D and cooperation, like without like shooter, like and they all almost like they had those games like in pretty good shape, so they have spent like loads of time, but they'd say, oh no, we don't like it anymore, and they have done something
Right.
completely different.
Yeah, it's it's very interesting. I mean, it's a story for another time, but it's like I do feel this thing like, when you do business software, you work with the customers in the business setting. There are certain requirements. It's a little bit different when you do product. I do understand it, but when you do software services consultancy, you think about the requirements, what needs to be fulfilled. And it's games, I think it's like totally different. You can have some sort of requirements, things like that. But at the end of the game, what counts is like, will people play it? And it's not like you fulfill some requirements or something like that. It has to have something in it. Something. It's difficult to to define what it is. This something. So yeah.
Yeah. So like that's what I was saying. Like I'm super grateful for like being able to work for Cake, and like that level of experience which built on my previous experience just enabled me to set up my consultancy and like be successful in what I'm doing, and hopefully what I will be doing in the future. So I'm grateful for that.
Right. So I would we definitely wanted to focus on those different expectations, requirements in the different steps on your career, because we look at it and through the lens of various stages in the management development path, from individual contributor, team leader to engineering manager. But before we do that, maybe you could give us like few words about how do you define the role of a team lead. And I'm asking this question specifically because I think that people intuitively, like, they do understand individual contributor, like you do your work with your own hands. Your output is what you are, in terms of the work is what counts there. Then there is this engineering manager that people intuitively again understands is more into the people management, coordination. But I think that team leader's role is kind of difficult to define what is needed there. What are the characteristics of the role? What is the ratio of there's obviously some management, there's obviously some individual contributor roles. And there's all those names, like, I think having a name of the role team lead, in various companies, you have team leads, technical leads, or tech leads. Then you have engineering managers. And depending on the company, this might be one of the same roles. So could you give us, a little bit of your insight about the specificity of the role of team leader?
Yeah, definitely. So I think like it's important to say like that it really depends on the company. Like you have mentioned the tech lead and team lead. Like in smaller companies, and even like for a team lead, I think it's not necessary, but usually it's good that the team lead is a tech lead for that given area, and like what is being built. Like it doesn't really necessarily to be the case. There can be like senior software engineer who is very strong, but like doesn't really want to do the other part of the job, which I can like go into, like from how I view it, like in the team lead. Like there is still, depending on the size component of the company and like what are the other supportive roles, it's like the planning and requirements, kind of talking to the stakeholders, which depends like who that is if it's like some sort of product owner, which is one person, or a product team, or like the people in HR, like providing the work intake depending on what the process is. So like it's just how the work comes into the team, the responsibility. It's kind of making sure that the requirements are as clear as possible for the team, and he has to work with both of the sides, like with his engineering team to make sure he understands it, he is able to explain it to the team, then like in these different ceremonies, however methodology, whatever is being used, kind of make sure that the team understands this as well, so they can pick it up and work it through. And then like planning in the sense of, again, like if there is some project manager working with him or technical project manager or whatever, you still have to look into a little bit like organizing the work into the sprints. Let's say if Scrum is being used, or in Kanban, like what's the capacity of the team, these kind of things. And it maybe even like being able to measure some of the velocity, but like not as much. Like off the bat, I would say like that the split in between, it's like 80% coding or like the individual contributor work, or like it's not even saying like it's not right to say like individual contributor. It's more like I would say engineering work, because it doesn't necessarily mean that all this 80% are spent like being like writing the code. It's like much more code reviews of the team, like setting up and designing the architecture for what is being built by the given team. And so this like design and architecture is a big thing, and it's like what I was saying, the tech lead, team lead in a small team, it's kind of similar thing. I think like the definition of a tech lead kind of differs and like somehow gets blurred in the small companies where there isn't that many people, like you don't have that many specialized roles, because tech lead can stand on its own, like next to a team lead and like but like then it becomes more like principal engineer. So like for me, the tech lead and like principal engineer is something similar. So like you have someone like who goes around and helps different teams, while team lead is solely focused on his small area of expertise and team who he helps to succeed. So I've talked about the design and architecture, and then obviously like the implementation, execution of the code and everything. So like that's the IC part. But I think like additionally to that, like when I mentioned the reviews and stuff, it's kind of working with the team members as well. And it's even like coaching and mentoring of the junior members of the team, which in the best setup like you can have, like it's all the team members are helping to the newcomers and like try to make them better. And it should be like a collaborative environment where like the goal of everyone to get as much as possible from everyone. But like the individual contributors probably don't expect and wouldn't be that keen on doing these things, but the team lead like he should kind of help his team and all the members to get as much, be better developers. Yeah, that's probably the best thing.
Yeah, so it's sort of a mixture, right, of these, people management and the individual contribution role.
Yeah, and then like last thing, I think like it depends like what sort of other supporting roles you have, but it's like quality of the software. So like some sort of testing, does it like what the team is building, does it work? Is it reliable? Doing some deployments and these things. Like I definitely I'm up for like you build it, you run it, and like having a strong ownership. So that has to be like pushed from the team lead onto the team members as well. So yeah, like maybe we'll get into it like a little bit later in terms of responsibilities and these things, but like in some way like the team lead is responsible for the team and quality, but like he should be able to explain to his team and his members that like the whole team is responsible for these things. Right. So like I said, testing, deployment, release management, and these things, like it's usually on the team lead. That doesn't mean that that the other team members can't do those things, but like he's the one like who kind of keeps an eye on that and manages the life cycle of all those things. And because it's usually best like if you have someone like who can make the decisions and have the final say, let's say.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like I specifically like the thing that you said about the that you should be somehow involved and responsible for you said this, you build it or you run it, and I think it's a generally a good idea in terms of being responsible for the products of your work. And many problems I think arise from these, from the fact that there is a separation, like you have DevOps team or production team or however you call it, who is responsible operational, who is responsible for the running software, and different team responsible for building it. I think that it sets incentives, wrong. I mean, I do appreciate the fact that, like in your case, when you have a young child at home, it's difficult to, for instance, be on support and do 24-hour support in certain days. But so I do appreciate it. But at a certain level, it's worth to have this feedback loop of people building software being responsible to have, in a way, so Nassim Taleb will say, a skin in the game, right? That you build software and you are sort of responsible, and because of that, you're building it more responsibly, because at the end of the day, it's gonna hurt you, not the other team, but you will be, you would pay the price because you would be, waking up at night or something like that to fix some issues. I think that helps, a lot of engineers, I think, that start with this idea that let's build something clever, and over time they understand, sometimes simple is better than clever.
Yeah, exactly. And from experience, even when engineers being introduced to support, sometimes they are completely fine with it. Sometimes they are trying to fight it so hard, but in the end, and when we have been rolling it out, in the end, everyone was kind of okay with it, because it was lucky enough that the teams who worked with me was always building good quality software, so there wasn't really that many callouts, and all those people were pretty good engineers, but it's still asking for something more, and it's not typically something what you would expect in this kind of a job. If you think about it, there are fairly many other jobs who have to be on standby, if they are doing some things and running important things, and so we can't have all the benefits all the times as a software engineers.
Yeah. So we mentioned this this mixture of these management and the individual contributor role for the team lead. Now I wonder this. There are some companies that have these diverging paths and progression paths, or engineering progression, and they usually have something like the individual contributor progression path, or engineering progression, or engineering career framework, where they do have those roles of, typically junior, mid-level engineer, senior, staff, principal, and then they have those people management branch where they have, engineering manager, senior engineering manager, VP of something, and other roles in that area. And I wonder, in terms of the team lead seems like a stepping stone towards the management path, but the team lead role itself, would you put it rather on the management path in companies where you have the progression, or would you rather put it on the individual contributor path?
Yeah, I think I would put it on the management path, really.
The first step.
Though the first step, and kind of getting a taste of what the management is and what the different roles are, because you do more communication with with different people, different stakeholders. You have to mediate anything what happens in the team if there is some disagreement around which library is going to be used, or what sort of style, and any conflicts even on a personal level, let's say, you should try to mitigate, unless it's something so tough that you have to escalate some of those things. But I think it's definitely a good opportunity for the people who would be interested in that to try that out. And I have quite a lot of cases where people just tried it and find out that it's not something for them, and they just want to focus more on the technical stuff, which is logical, because I think it's tricky tricky thing in general to how to train the team, like the team leads or any sort of management skills, because I think it's essential for the people to understand the work like which is being done on like the software development lifecycle, and like kind of go through it, and even like building software, like how it is. And like sometimes people say like, yeah, like why something takes so long or whatever. It's like building a house, right? It's easy. Like some of the things over the course of the 20 years like which we are doing are like getting closer to that, because everything gets like more standardized, and like you have experience of building those things, but like many of things are changing all the time. So like understand this nature of the job is for me like super important. So like recruiting the managers from the actual individual contributors, for me it's super key. On the other hand, like it's very complicated because typically the people who are doing these things, like they are doing them because they like to deal with the technical problems, solve the problems where there are some rule apply, so they are not as keen on dealing with interpersonal relationships, and it's just like I have this piece of work which I can go at, like it's nicely defined, I have the requirements, I will do it, it does what you have told me to do, and like I don't have like in ideal world I don't have to talk to anyone or to my team lead, and that's it. Like just leave me alone, do my thing. And then this is the pool of people like which we have to just kind of upskill or find the ones who are interested in doing more in terms of management, which I think it's challenging, because like I'm not saying that the engineers or software engineers are bad at management, but like just by definition it's the people who wanted to do engineering, not management. If they would go like and study and do some sort of management from the start. So like this whole thing, it's like fairly challenging, I would say.
Right. Yeah. And by the way, I got to tell you that I have myself, I have doubts about going into management. Like you said, some people going into management school, going straight into management. You said about, recruiting managers from the individual contributors, from the engineers. I have some doubts about someone who enters the role as a manager without having this experience, hands-on on being, of knowing what it is to be an engineer. I think that's an important thing. And it's also an interesting thing, because I guess there is an angle, which we may talk later on about angle of how do you maintain this understanding of the engineering work? Because I can imagine that if you work in the role for like 10 years, some things you forget, and some things, this is a fast changing world, and some things by the time you spend 10 years in management, they have already changed in the engineering world. There are different tools, different approaches. So it's probably another angle that we could discuss. But before we do that, I wanted to focus on this. You mentioned these, described as team leaders role. And yeah, I think I agree with your definition, how you frame this role. And now going into these transitions, focusing on your transition from individual contributor to team lead, and from team lead to engineering manager, maybe you could tell us a little bit, what were the important things that you did that led you to these transitions? Like, what do you have to do? What was appreciated? What people saw in you? Your managers, people that you were reporting to, what they saw in you that they promoted you to these roles. How you can yourself, if someone wants to move from individual contributor to team leader, or from team leader to manager, what they need to focus on. How do you think they could find help? Are there any resources that they could look after? So I'm interested in this area. Could you give a little bit of detail about this?
Yeah, so I think like from the individual contributor to team lead, I think it's like the first step is coming from the person themselves. Like we can get into the resources a little bit later. Like there is always like some stuff. What you can do and read to what you should do. But like for me, it really has to come from your behavior which gets noticed by your like team members and the current team lead and people like within the company. So like you have to like, I wouldn't say fight, but like you really have to show that you care about like what you are doing, like from both like technical quality and excellence in the code, let's say, to make sure like that you want to always like have the best possible solutions, obviously in some like timely manner or whatever. So just kind of be a little bit of a high performer, but like not necessarily that's not always the case, but like like I'm saying like you don't have to be the best programmer on the team, but like it's always like in terms of being noticed, like you have to do probably a little more than anyone else. And then outside of the technical stuff, like you have to express their interest in like some of these things, which are the key areas of the team lead, which I have mentioned, like the ownership of the service and like kind of care about why you are doing things or like the features being developed, like trying to get involved and understand and ask questions around like why we are doing this like this way, coming up with ideas how things could be done a better way, and like trying to engage with the stakeholders, like getting interested in like being kind of get yourself more somewhere closer to the team lead and trying to get a say or like give a say to team lead at least of how you things like should be done, which is like super valuable for the team lead as well to get some feedback and then just work together to make the solution better and just like do this in an organized manner, because like obviously everything like starts with a decision like that you would want to be a team lead. So like this is kind of what I was talking about. It's like setting the individual contributor on their path to becoming team lead. Like once they have decided, like I think it's important to try to find out what it is, but working closely with the team leads and different teams, like you can see and observe like what they are doing, and like there is like a couple more meetings and these things. So like that seems like from the individual contributor point of view, it's like your team lead is kind of giving you the work and has more meetings than you, but like perhaps you don't see as much other things like he's doing because he's not trying to bother you with, because that's like one of the other roles which I haven't mentioned. It's like the protection layer to create the space for the engineers to do their work like uninterrupted. So like that's on purpose, that it doesn't really overlap, and then the individual contributor doesn't really have the insight of someone else harassing the team lead, and he only like telling the team like, and now we will be doing some changes a week later, because it's not really, it makes no difference at that point in time for the individual contributor, so they don't need to be disrupted that some feature will be done differently because they are doing something right now and there is no impact. So like it's kind of this thing, kind of keeping the team chugging along like nicely without disruptions, which I didn't mention like previously. And yeah, like there are definitely like some materials to look at, like how to become team lead, but I think like it's much more relevant on the general like choosing the management kind of path within the software engineering organization, because it always then like starts to focus more on the engineering management roles and kind of soft skills and these things, which I think like the team lead needs, but in much less manner, because it's the team lead's role is still like, again, dependent on the company. In larger corporations, it's not really as much of a people management. Like you should be working together with the ICs, but it's more about like making them better ICs, like kind of helping them to transition from the junior software developers in like higher buckets or senior engineers. So like me personally, what I have done, like this is exactly like what I was talking about right now. Just kind of be super like assertive and proactive, interested in the project, interested even like what the company is doing, like just beyond what the team is doing and the project is working, just kind of general interest, and like that will get noticed like by your team lead, by your peers, by the engineering managers. And that's like, it really depends on like what the process of selecting of the new team leads is like within the company. Like I generally haven't seen anything like which would be very well established. I think like partially that may be because of the background which I have. I haven't like really focused on the career path developments as you would have in the bigger corporations, because we always like had fairly senior people with a clear task like which we need to do, and like nobody was like really looking as much into just making some progression, even though as small company owner I need like team leads myself as well, because like that's like where you have like multiple teams or whatever, I can't like run everything. But like back to the transition, I think like for the team lead itself, I don't think like that would be like as much of a
You mentioned that it's like
literature.
One of the key things is just an attitude, right? Attitude that you need to have, in order to be seen that, people see that you care about a bigger picture about the entire team, not only about the effects of your work, which is, I think it's a key point. Like as you said, it's the transition is smoother. I think that the more difficult one might be, or more challenging one might be to the engineering manager from the team lead. And I can tell you that, I have the experience in our company that a lot of people were struggling in this role. And I think partially it was because they didn't know what to expect. So I think that more than one person told me once, that was several years ago, that transition to the engineering manager role, after a half a year of being in this role, what they said is like, that is not what we expected it's going to be. But at the same time, they also said, but we would still decide in the same way, we would still decide to go into this direction, knowing now what we know, which showed a little bit of our failure as an organization, that we didn't, paint a very, good and reliable picture of how this role would look like in terms of what would be the activities, what would be the responsibilities. But most of the people, even though that they have sort of different expectations, stayed in this role. So I think it's, given that, I think that is a little bit more involved in terms of the changes than the team leader role. So maybe we could expand on that, right? What is the important things? What are the important qualities? What are the attitudes? What are the things that you should focus on both before the promotion and after the promotion?
Yeah, I think like another thing is like the willingness of accept the responsibilities. Like it just seems like very corporation, like company wise, it's saying like, oh, it's the people who always like wants to willing to more. But it's like, but like that kind of comes from some motivation and drive of the person, because they really want to do quality work, understand what they are doing. So obviously then they are better leaders for that, because they simply care about like what they are doing, and like they want themselves to succeed, and they want like the whole business to succeed, and they want the whole team to succeed, and like they are willing to help with their team with doing so. Like with the engineering manager, I agree. I think like there is much more resources like which I would recommend, and it's mainly about the soft skills. And I think the role like much more depends on much more coordination. So I was talking like for the team lead, like you have some kind of interactions with your team, some kind of interactions with the product owner or whatever there is to discuss the requirements or whatever. There is a little bit of a cross collaboration, because at some time, like there are some dependencies in between the different teams and the services, so they probably talk to different team leads, but like that's kind of the circle of responsibility. Now for the engineering manager, like sorry, there is certain level of coordination, but then for engineering manager, that kind of the depending on the corporation, like we were saying like 80% engineering work, and like this 80% like goes down rapidly. Like some of these things which we have mentioned for the team link like goes up, like this planning and requirements, building roadmaps, coordinating the different teams, like having the insight and visibility of those teams' capacity and like what they are building, so you can coordinate and build a roadmap for the whole of your organization. So like that's kind of, so it's kind of like it's much more management, and like you have to be much more structured and organized and be able to communicate very well with people. So like again soft skills, like the engineering part maybe 20%, like typically the engineering manager doesn't code as much or at all. Like it really depends on the size of the organization. It may do some sort of architectural things and like designs and like defining the APIs, but it really depends of like what other supportive roles are there. So like then transitioning them from a team lead, I think like I agree with you that it's much more ambiguous what the job is actually going to be, and like you are steering much further away from the pure engineering work, and that's probably what surprises like everyone. Because like this planning requirements and all these things, I think like that's kind of goes naturally, and maybe even in the real contributor role, you still have to understand like what you are supposed to build and like think about it. And like this planning requirements, building the roadmaps, different kind of skill set, but it's still doable. It just like broadens the scale, and like you have to lump in like different smaller units, like fit the Gantt charts or whatever, so you can then come up with when something will be delivered or not. So like there is plenty of like materials on the internet on just like different methodologies of how to run projects, how to look at the velocity of the team. So I probably wouldn't mention anything, but I think like the software engineering industry itself, it's like fairly mature in using those agile methodologies or whatever, and from experience, like all the even individual contributors are fairly up to speed and like understand like what is it about. It's then more about like getting out of the metrics and the reporting and these things. It's like in some way it's a funny thing that always the individual contributors are upset like when some estimations and these things are being done, they don't want to give them because they feel like someone that tries to control them too closely. Like all these informations are like, and that's like another management kind of a job of the team lead to explain them like why this is being done, and that's like that it's not completely useless. And then as we go like higher in the ladder or like
I think there's a lot of this, like, a lot of this. People are worried about this, and they don't like because it often seems like a micromanagement, like as you said. And I think what's like one of the things that I think that when we talk about stakeholders, people for not necessarily pay money, but as an engineering teams, we report to the stakeholders of various kinds. Like in my experience, they care more about transparency and knowing where they are, comparing to if they wanted to comparing to how fast it is. So if they wanted to trade being extremely fast but having no transparency at all, they wouldn't say it, but typically they prefer in the real world transparency, even if it means that there are some delays that normally happens, but they are notified upfront, and they sort of feel that they have all the knowledge that they need to precisely know where they are, because they also report to someone else. They need to have this visibility to tell how the larger portfolio is going on and things like that. So in a way, I think that if it's done right, you are right, I think, because teaching about how important these, this being transparent and having this reporting in line, it doesn't have to take, very, significant amount of time. But if it's done well, it could be done in a way that it doesn't, cost you that much in terms of time spent. I think it gives you even the freedom in a way, because no one is bothering you, because they already know what's happening, and then you can freedom to, to pursue the things that you want to do with your team in a way.
I think like it's part of the job, and like for the engineering, for the team lead, it's more like explaining this and running it on the low level with the ICs to make them happy and collaborative about it. And then for the engineering manager, like that's one of the main sources of like information, like which is not necessarily saying like there are many tools like which just crunch those numbers, but like, I was saying like we don't want to evaluate the performance of the individual contributors, but like we need to see like the velocity of the teams or performance of the team, so we can see like there are differences between teams, like it's bit differences between people, it's normal. It's only about like knowing how quickly things can be done, so we can like accordingly plan for that, so we can get as accurate information, we can report like upstream as accurate information as we can. And it's like, it's a difficult thing like to manage and like make all the teams like understand, because they will always be pushing against that and they are worried about it. But yeah, I think like everyone even accepts upstream and any sort of changes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like we can then, I think like we are going like beyond this question specifically, like what we had, other things from the team lead to engineering manager. So it's definitely more of this, like definitely like much broader circle of, let's say, a little bit more managerial roles to talk to. So like how to prepare yourself for that. I think like on the engineering management, there is like fair amount of literature like which I would recommend, like especially from the soft skills, because it's much more about the pure people management, and there is like fair amount of coaching and mentoring for the engineering manager to help the team leads. And like you could say that the engineering manager is kind of training the team leads in a way in their job at the time like when they got promoted. So obviously the team lead, like we should pick a team lead with some experience or whatever, but like then the engineering manager is there for the team leads to kind of help them out, help them grow, help them to deal with the problems like they don't know how to deal with like within the team, unblock them and so that means like the engineering manager has to have like different set of skills and have much more experience, and like ideally some experience in the team leader role, so he can understand those problems which the team leader has, so he can provide like a proper advice. And yeah, it's about like these books I'm keep on talking about. It's like about motivation, like the book Drive, then the from Harvard business review. So that was like pretty good book which I have read on the emotional intelligence. So like that's another one. So when we were talking about the engineers, like they don't really like to deal with people. So like I think like this is like very important book to understand like both the drive and the emotional intelligence, and it's more about like understanding and making the relationship between the people better, and then the like radical candor from Kim Scott.
It's
like
a great book. We also have it on our list of books recommended for new engineering managers and team leads.
Yeah, so like I think like it's like very effective book, even like to how to using your communication skills and how to manage in an effective way, which will allow you to grow and like your people to grow, because sometimes like you can like you're going like to some slightly different problems, but like I think like it's super important to like read this kind of books if you want to be like a good manager and like deal with the people in a nice ways. Like there is this other blog with Georgi Orosz. So like I think like he is
pragmatic programmer, right?
Yeah. So I think like he has quite a lot of articles about the topic of like engineering managers and like and like different kind of roles. So there are even some like specific blog posts with his own view of definitions of these different roles, like as individual contributor and like team lead and tech lead and principal engineer and engineering manager. So like that's another kind of way of looking into how it works, like in the software engineering world, like what are the possible transitions in between the roles. I was saying like you can go from the team lead manager back to the individual contributor if you find out it's not something for you, but you can find out that it's actually very interesting to do some of these things. I mean like managing people. And another thing, it's definitely about like having more influence like within the company and like on one side, let's say more responsibility, but like we'll probably talk about it a little bit more, but like more influence to affect things. So like the higher you go in the ladder, but like it's very different way of affecting things, and like it's the mindset change from the IC to team lead to engineering manager, because you have more influence, you have more control over things, but like indirect control, because like you are not writing the code anymore. The team lead has like quite a lot of control in the sense of if something goes wrong, he can just kind of go jump in and say like, guys, like this takes too long. I will fix it, and like I will have to, we will push it and do this. But then like if you go the step higher and like you are coming from this background and you keep on going through the transitions, and it happened to me as well. Like if you are on the engineering manager role, you somehow like if you haven't trained yourself and familiarized yourself enough with that role, you can get to the stage where you feel like, oh, like this is like wrong. I need to now like jump in and help that team with the stuff. But like like that's not what you should do.
Right.
Like you need to give the space to the teams and people to solve their problems, because that's the only, because you don't have the time to help them with that as much. Like that's one thing. And the second thing, if you would do that, like you wouldn't give them the space to grow and solve the things like themselves, so they would feel micromanaged and everything. Like you have chosen these people to be capable, you have the team lead and everyone, so like you should let them to deal with the things themselves unless they come to you and like ask you for help. So it's so outside of more coordination and like planning and requirements, which I have mentioned, like that, which is part of the role of the engineering manager, which is kind of difficult to acquire. So a lot of literature, but then like you still have to keep on doing to get the experience, and it's mainly about like understanding the different people and like what drives them, what motivates them. That's why I was mentioning all those books, because all the people are like slightly different, so you have to treat them differently. It's, in my opinion, if you treat everyone the same way, then you are doing your job not completely right. It depends on the leadership style for sure, but like there is different things like which works well for one team lead, and there are different things which work well for the other team lead. And like if you know them well based on how they behave, so if you build the relationships and trust in between each other as it's with a radical candor, then you can actually like understand. You would figure out what's going on even if the team lead like doesn't tell you everything, and like, you would know what you need to do to help them out. So that's another thing like which is like very different in the transition in terms of the responsibilities, and it's really difficult to, I think, acquire the experience just like quickly, just to be promoted. You have to be sometime in the team lead role, and then like the jump in between the roles, or to the engineering manager who like manages multiple teams. It takes a lot of time. Like it happened, like it takes a lot of time to become like engineering manager. And like I think what I was trying to say, it's like a big jump. Like really the role like changes so massively. But then like what we were saying, the engineers like who are doing the change from the team lead, like they don't even like realize like how different that is.
Yeah.
And they still keep on trying to apply the same things and like same behaviors as they have been doing as the team leads. And yeah, like it's not something like which you should be doing.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's often this, I think in many organizations, there is this trap of, you typically promote or give more responsibility to people who perform well. So we have this thing that if someone perform well and cares about the team, they become a team lead. And then when they perform well, sometimes they become engineering managers. And it doesn't seem always to be right, because like I think that, as sort of you hinted at, it's like when you move from senior to team lead, it's not that it is a change, but it's not as significant, and you still rely on a lot of skills that you were doing and you were practicing in your individual contributor role. And it's even more true obviously when you go from senior to staff engineer, or from mid to senior, from senior to staff or principal. You base on the skills that you have, whereas when you go to the management path, suddenly you are in the situation that in a way you become a junior again, because now you have a different skills that are the most important ones, the skills that you didn't practice that much in the past. And the funny thing is that, when the pressure arrives, what I saw a lot of time, a good portion of engineering managers start to fall back on the skills that they used in the past and they practiced. So that's engineering, which means they start going there like there is a pressure, you need to be delivered something on time. And then those engineering managers, instead of making sure that the teams is working well, they fall back on like, I gotta be hands-on because we are not gonna make it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think like that's, at least for me, like it's even applicable in generally. Like I can see that it's almost like this thing like which you are used to doing something and you are so familiar with it. So even like with work, like sometimes if you have maybe even like something difficult to deal with life, you'll say like, oh, like let me work, and like you would rather stay like overtime and doing something because it's like nicely defined work where everything makes sense, you are in control, and it's just an escape hedge in some way, because
known territory.
Yeah, exactly. So I definitely agree with that. Have done that myself like a couple of times, but then like that what comes from the journey, like if you have to go through it and like made the realization that in that sense, like that's, if you think about it, so like maybe like having like engineering managers themselves like having the less exposure to coding like may make this like issue a little bit easier for them to deal with, because they simply like wouldn't have this. But like there would be like some things which wouldn't be as beneficial like that. Like if you don't have the experience, then you probably may understand like a little bit less of like what's going on. But like definitely at this level, like, it's pretty detached from the coding, and like it really shouldn't be done. Like I think like there are definitely cases where the roles like overlap, and then the engineering manager kind of can have the role of a tech lead or a principal software engineer as well, and like he has quite a lot of say on the system design and architecture. But it's still like, if there is fair amount of people underneath you, it's probably not like coding what you should be doing.
Right. But then
as
at the
I
same
mentioned,
time, as you said, it's probably having some skills in that or experience is essential, because in a way, at least I think you gotta be able to detect bullshit. Like sometimes it happens that someone comes to you and says that can be done or it can't be done better, and you need to understand where it's okay to accept that, and you need to sort of feel when you need to push it a little bit more, because there is something more that you could get, and it is in a way important. So you need to be able to, I think, at least have sufficient knowledge to know where to push. Like, I think that the motivation, like, is that different people work differently, and some people needs to be pushed to a little bit to deliver the great work in certain times. So and you need to know where it's possible, right? It's not even from the people perspective, that's one thing, but also from the perspective of engineering. You got to understand what of these areas that could be done better at the same time with a budget that is reasonable, right? It's obviously, I think that in the business line where we work, it's like people want to have perfect software, but in reality they don't. Like, if they knew how expensive it is to deliver perfect software, and I'm talking about perfect like a rocket science perfect, when you set rockets to the orbit, and there can't be any mistakes, because otherwise hundreds of millions of dollars will be lost, or people may die. That level of perfectionism is not desired, because it's extremely expensive. Like, so you got to understand it, right? Which one is which, right?
And like definitely, I think like that's kind of important in this role. I still think like the individual contributors like strive much more over perfection, and then like when you go like towards this more managerial oriented roles, like the team lead or engineering manager, like there has to come like a little bit of realization of like pragmatism and like this kind of value the time or like quality kind of ratio, like to tune these knobs around. Like we have to deliver something, and at the end of the day, if it's not like some of these like mission critical software, as you put, and depends really on the given software, but in the end of the day, like the business really wants some functioning software which does well what they have asked for, like how it is implemented, and if it's like super performant, and it's great, but like if it's like less performant and still works okay for their use cases they want it's okay for them, and like we may have spent like much less money and time to deliver it for them, and they would be actually much happier. So like it's another like skill which comes, I think, from the experience of doing like multiple different projects and like delivering them for clients to realize this, that it's at times much more important to like deliver something which is good enough rather than something like what's perfect.
Right. In a way, as you said, that's sort of funny, because I've said that sometimes you need to push some people to get better performance or better quality at some point. But the opposite is also quite true. You often have to stop some people from being perfectionism for delivering anything in a perfect way. So, and I think maybe in a way what you're saying is even more common. This pragmatism coming from the business reality is often what is required, right? Because it doesn't have it doesn't make sense to spend like we had examples in the past, not only on our side, but I saw it in many companies, like there were software being built for startups. They didn't even have a product market fit, and maybe they have like 5 customers, total of 15 users, and yet they built something for the scale of they were thinking about how do we handle million users. Like, it's when you're gonna go, before you go to million, you're probably gonna have first 1,000 and then maybe a few thousand, and on the way it would be a good problem to have. How do you scale at some point? It's probably now it's better to just focus on the business instead of taking another, because it costs, right? As one of the things is the money, the other thing is time. Building something that handles 100 millions of concurrent users is much more difficult and time consuming than building something simple that would just handle like these days you can build anything that will handle 1,000 users, right? Most of the time.
Yeah, and typically it's like even like difficult to manage, right? Like, because you choose like some of the technologies which everyone in the engineering world may not be like familiar as much, because like they give you the best performance and everything, and like now everything is better as it like comes through compute and performance for sure. But like, yeah, like typically these systems which takes longer to build are, even though like if you have them scaled down, they are more complicated to manage. So like that's kind of additional cost.
Precisely.
So like if you don't really have the income and like enough clients to just kind of keep on paying, so it's much more additional cost. Like you can say that like rewriting it. Then again, if you see like everything is working, it's growing, it's another cost. Like you can be like clever about some of these things, and even with some basic stuff, you can get like high quality performance, and then it's like nice problem to have something like which was small, now it's growing, making money, so you can invest more to make it more performant. Like, but it's usually with the clients, like sometimes it's like very, very difficult to argue with them, but that's the part like of the like engineering managers' jobs as well, like management of the stakeholders and everything. So it's kind of a parallel in between like consultancy work and the work in corporations and like the roles. So in a smaller company, you have clients. In a corporation, you have the stakeholders in the organization, and in some way the small organization almost work like some smaller companies like within the org where they have to manage different stakeholders. So in some way, like doing these things, I think like they are fairly transferable in between the small world and the corporate world. Like there is much more about like what we are talking about is like engineering management and soft skills and like the management in general. I think like that's much more specific to the corporations and bigger companies where you have like bigger teams, bigger project, more people being involved. So like that's kind of the specificity about the role. Plus what we haven't mentioned, like what's the difference with the engineering management. Like team lead does a little bit of it, but like I was talking about the capacity management and these things. It's even like the engineering manager sees that all, and like it's even those questions: is this team like big enough? Like are they performing well? Do they actually need some additional member? So like the engineering management role typically is, and like the transition and the change in the mindset is like being involved in the human resources kind of part of the job, like deciding, do we have some open positions, do we have some more people, do we need another team, like helping hiring that kind of team. Like team leads and ICs, like they do that as part of the job. Like they kind of go and interview some candidates, like if they are good fit into this team, right? But like, and they can say like, we probably need someone else, some other person, because we have plenty of work like coming our way, and they say to the engineering manager. But like ideally, the good engineering manager should see it, like and should see on the roadmap, like this team would be underutilized, so we have to plan like one more person, and already like giving them that one person like ahead this new additional work is coming. So because you have always like some lead time until the new hire like gets productive. That doesn't happen like immediately. So like you have to keep on planning ahead, and that's like another skill set and responsibility within the role of an engineering manager in my opinion, because like he has the best insight into the teams, and that's like maybe something what people wouldn't like typically expect. It's part of the job. And so which kind of lines up in my case with being like some small business owner and like managing different projects for clients, like having enough people. So like tough one really, but like that's kind of closer. Like we are talking management, this one is another bucket of skills, like running a business, I would say almost, because like you need this, and that's another difference between the team lead and engineering manager. And definitely each is a specific thing to corporations to kind of evolve and support the people on their path like through the company. So like working for corporations, I think it's interesting for the people mainly because you have some paths like of progress and you can get promoted and the company will help you with that, like will help you to grow, and it's another responsibility of an engineering manager in some way, like to help grow all the people who are reporting to him, and even like kind of setting up some goals or for a given year, and then evaluating it with his directs and these stuff. It's just like again another skill set, but everything like kind of builds on top of the strong communication skills and like building the relationships and trust with the people who you are working with, because then everything kind of goes much better and effective way.
One thing that is difficult for new engineering managers is this responsibility expansion. And I'm talking specifically about being responsible for the work that you are not doing directly. And more than that, for the work that you might not be able to fully grasp. Because what I'm saying here is like when you are individual contributor, and as you said, like for the team lead is so close to the actual work, to the actual hands-on work, that even if someone's typically, goes for a vacation or wherever disappears for any reason, team leads can pick up the work and, fill the gaps. It's a little bit different for engineering managers, mostly. I mean, some do that, but it's especially if you have a larger team and you have like 6, 7, 8, 10 people, it's becoming much more difficult. You are not exposed that much into that work. Sometimes you don't even review all the stuff. You don't even some engineering managers don't only look occasionally into the how things are changing in the code base, so they wouldn't be able to pick up hit the ground running if they had to be hands-on from the next day. And yet they have to be, and they are responsible for the work of the entire team. They cannot say when they talk with the stakeholders and their managers, they cannot say it's not my fault, it's like someone from my team, right? They are responsible for the work of the entire team, and it's difficult for many people. Do you have any advice on that? How to train this muscle of being responsible for others people's work, even if you don't entirely grasping here what is happening there?
Yeah, I think this responsibility piece, it's probably the most challenging part of making the transition from the team lead to engineering manager. I have kind of touched upon that myself, I had some feelings that I have to jump in, but I think you have to work with the things you can influence directly, which is telling the teams on how to manage on the capacity and everything, that so they can provide you with the good data, so you have a good grasp of what's going on in where and how long it will take them do things. And then eventually if there is really crisis, it may be that you may help them a little bit more in some instance with some specific team. It does help, but it's to you to deal with that stress, but maybe not as much with the overall project and the responsibilities as we have mentioned, but it will let you get out some of that stress. It will help the team which is under the pressure. So it's about persuading those teams and motivating them if there is some issue to push harder and doing those things. You as an engineering manager, you can really influence the teams which are underneath you and what sort of data are providing you, and you can only influence on what is the intake of the work on and how you manage those things upstream with the stakeholders. So for me it's it's the key really building strong relationships with all the team leads, so you can really trust them and you can rely on the data which are being provided with you, and they are not really afraid. So it's leadership style as well, being a super strict boss and just be a little bit hard on people may not be as great approach, because then like they would be afraid to come to you to say like there something is a problem. They can be like hiding it for some time, and the later the bigger problem it will become afterwards. So like it's still the communication, building the trust and relationship with people, so you have the visibility and like transparency across the organization, and then at any point in time you would know what's happening. Like you are still responsible. It's like stressful, but then you can report all these things like upstream, and you manage the stakeholders. So like these relationships and trust, like you have to build it upwards, like with the people who are like providing you with the work, with the stakeholders, with the product owners, like and build those relationships. Like ideally it goes best like when you actually are able to deliver something with those teams. So building the trust, like kind of coming from delivering some results, so they can understand that like, yeah, if they are saying something, they will do it that way, or like within the bounds of some error, that's fine. But like it's those things like which was the mantra at one of the cakes, like which we had like under promise and over deliver, and like these kind of things. Like you can build out all these safeties in your managerial process, so you feel comfortable, like which doesn't necessarily mean it's like on purpose saying like we will do less and like you will overestimate everything, that it will take too long, but it's kind of being close on like what's happening, like, and trust your people that they will tell you if something is wrong. But then obviously the trust works in a way as well, like if there is really a lot of pressure, like, and something needs to be done, and it's really important for the business with some deadline, like you can then come to the teams and like explaining that, and like that's this thing, it's really crucial. And from experience, the teams are like, and people are willing like to work like harder for a certain period of time, but like you have to use that like really carefully, because like long term obviously you will burn down the team, you will burn yourself, and then it will have negative outcomes over long term. But like sometimes if there is a push, so like that's kind of one way in the responsibility. It kind of comes out of like how you organize your work, over relationships you have with the people, and if you have visibility and everything and trust, then there is a pressure, but like you can then like report up like this is like how we are looking. And like from my experience as well, if you go to the stakeholders and there are some dates or whatever, with exceptions, like the dates can move, and like everyone understands that. So at times it's even like the conversation goes towards a way, instead of like the stakeholders like coming and saying like when it's going to be done, like give me the date. So it's a date of your choosing. They may give you some indication like this is the deadline we need it by. But if you come back and say like, yeah, we have done like this analysis or whatever, and based on work which we already have planned, and like then doing this, we think it's going to be like this, and then like you negotiate with them, and they may understand, they may not understand, and they would tell them like then we have to like discuss the scope or whatever. And like kind of these are the skills which I think help relieve the stress and like of the responsibility. And like you are responsible on those things for sure, but like you are only responsible for what you have negotiated for yourself. And like somewhat, in my opinion, everything is negotiable, and like you are in, you can influence up a little bit, and then anything under your teams. Then what helped me as well is the like peer groups of other engineering managers or people who are in the same like position as you are, and just like discussing like how they are trying to deal with some of the problems, and just generally venting about some frustration and things, because that's super important, because everyone like kind of gets stressed and needs to vent out like directly and complain about things, but you shouldn't really be doing that like with like kind of use that to channel some anger on your reports, or like be really complain like in an unconstructive way to your managers. Like it's useful to have a mentor like within the company as a single person or a group of people where you can like talk through the things in some sort of like not as formal way, so like that relieves the stress quite a lot, and then you will realize that
that's an interesting thing also from that perspective, that that's one of the things that companies could do. Like I was wondering about the sort of the follow-up questions, what companies, organizations could do to help, you know, people with the transition to team lead or to engineering managers, and to help them with the after the transition in this very, you know, fragile period of the, you know, first few months. And I think there's at least a couple of things like that we had from this conversation. One of them was, you know, this providing this network of peers that you have in the companies. It might be peers, but it also might be you know, mentors, like a specific mentor, probably one or two, and a larger group of peers. What I found out, I don't know if we agree with that, but what I found out, we were running a few circles of that, of peers. And typically it takes some time, as with any team, for those, you know, for those teams to gel, to, you know, somehow connect together. And what typically happened is on the first meeting, people were a little bit shy about talking about their problems. So someone told me even that, like that the groups of peers of managers, when they didn't build trust yet, someone told me this. In those groups that barely started, someone asks us questions and everyone has solutions. And those groups that were working together for some longer period of time, and there was some intimacy built already, and there was some, you know, the team gelled already together. In those groups, you know, a lot of people came up with doubts, and there was always like more questions than answers. And those teams that were not intimate enough, and more answers than questions, like almost everyone felt like vulnerable to say that they also have the same problem. So they were, you know, giving some answers. So that was an interesting observation.
Yeah, like I think like it's like with every new team, and like when there are no strong relationships, like people are like much more competitive and like want to prove their worth as well. So like that's exactly, it's maybe a sign of vulnerability, as you say, that like, yeah, like I wouldn't say like it's really a problem. Like let's come up with a solution on the spot. So
yeah.
I look like a little bit stronger.
Yeah.
I like with support, like from my experience on the path like I have been on, like for those transitions like which I have been provided, like it was not great.
Mm-hmm.
Like at the Cake, like we had like this peer group for improving the soft skills, like for the team leads, but like that was more like training wise organized. It was partially a reading club, so I would encourage like everyone to do that at their company. So like we had like bi-weekly meetings where we were discussing some topics. Then at the end, like we got another book, which the goal was to kind of read it or not read it, up to you, up to before the next session. And then like it was the next session, like we discussed it, and it was mainly focused about the book like which we have read, which was mostly around this like motivation of people, the psychology, the management, and like different kind of things, and like discussing the problems like which we are having, like kind of role playing, and like understanding that the role is really wearing those different hats, and like always like focusing on one or the other thing. So like that was really helpful. What another thing like which we were doing, it's outside of the peer groups, it's kind of shadowing in between the company, like in between the team lead, like it was the same thing which we have done. It's like everyone kind of had, let's say, like some sort of a wingman, so which was the designated person, like who can come up and do things when the team lead is away, because everyone like takes holidays and everything. And it was already like some sort of strong person which was on the path already, eventually like becoming the team lead, even though like they haven't decided or whatever, but like if they were in that role and like doing those things and like enjoying that may have set them on the path of becoming a team lead. And it's like the team lead is kind of training up and like mentoring the person who he works like closely day to day. And like I think like that's probably the best way of doing these things. And like we're talking like mentoring and coaching, but like within the team like day to day, I think like that's probably the best way to do it. And then the guy who has worked within the team under someone, like observing what they are doing, then maybe over time we're figuring out that you would really be keen doing that, even start like doing some things of purposely taking that guy on that person like on the meetings with you and like give him more and more responsibility, and then eventually take him in out and like giving his own team to run. So I still think like that's the most valuable thing. Obviously this is like super difficult to do in terms of the other transition from the team lead to engineering manager, because then the relationship between the two, it's usually not as strong as like within the unit of the one team, because the day-to-day work it's smaller, like the engineering manager kind of have more responsibilities. But like it really depends. Like I have had like very, very strong relationships with my engineering managers as well. But then it comes again, it's another part of the engineering role. It's developing his reports and like discussing and like helping deal with the problems which are more of an engineering like manager's nature. So that's in some way like it's part of that relationship. It's already in progress, like some sort of preparation for eventually going towards the engineering management role, because like you see like how the conversations are going with your engineering manager, you have much more insight like what's happening, you are providing the input for the things like he wants. You maybe don't have like the full visibility like upwards into the stakeholders as much, but then that's something like you can be like trained on like a little bit later on as well. So like it's kind of what I think works. Obviously for the soft skills or whatever, there is like plethora of different courses. I think for coaching, mentoring and these things, I was looking into this, and unfortunately like they were fairly like expensive. And even though probably like working and very useful, but like at this level, like you have plenty of software engineers, like it was something like which was fairly difficult for the companies like to afford for their staff. But like lately with the emergence of the AI and like it seems there is quite a lot of courses and things like almost for free or very, very cheap, and like quite a lot of new materials to go through, like to go via like interactive manner. So that's probably something like to look into. I think like generally like teaching software engineering or whatever, like these days you can find quite a lot of material online. Like now it's maybe like even a little bit bad in the sense like there is so many, so it's difficult to pick the quality ones. So like it's either like someone recommends something, so it's probably like getting better.
Sure.
Yeah, and that's probably like what I have in terms of like training up people on like getting them prepared
And you mentioned
on the rows.
a couple of positions already, throughout the conversation. I think you mentioned these, just to sum up, you mentioned these Drive by Daniel Pink, then you mentioned Kim Scott's Radical Candor, then HBR's Emotional Intelligence, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
I think like what we are, suggesting people at our company is also this Camille Fournier's book, Manager's Path, which describes the, all those roles, team leads to individual contributors, team leads, the engineering manager, manager of managers, VP, up to a CTO. So interesting book because it describes the entire path. We also
I have it on my reading list.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We also have this other book, which is High Output Management. It's a pretty old position by Andy Grove, I think original CEO of Intel. It's pretty interesting. It's a bit of a classic. And yeah, like what you also mentioned from the coaching, that's an interesting thing, and the conversational soft skills, because I think it's also important that, you cannot just put, too many books or reading materials, because this is the soft skill area is one of those areas where it's very difficult to learn effectively theoretically. Because you read about something and, they say that if you don't practice something, it doesn't really, it's not really ingrained in your brain. And so I think it's especially true in soft skills. There's so many different books, and most of them, and many of them, have some, interesting insights. Those insights are often repeated. But it's one thing to read about something, and the other thing to being able to practice it in the heat of a daily work, many different priorities. You're often tired, or you think about something else. You are distracted, and it has to have some things ingrained, especially when you say about coaching, one-on-ones, and things like that. It has to be practiced in order to for you to be able to use it effectively, and I think that's the difficult part.
Yeah, I think like you have to practice it by doing, really, and like mostly getting the experience from being at the receiving end, let's say.
Right.
If you are like climbing the ladder, but like then if you are thinking about stepping up eventually, like you have to try to like visualize or try to like think about how it would look like if you would be on the other end. Mm-hmm. And like that's I think like another important thing, like to just use those meetings and everything. If you have these aspirations, to think about it like this way, if you would be doing it the same way as your manager is doing it, because at times like I can see like in the engineers like that they don't really enjoy like some of these meetings and like some of these like growth kind of plans and setting up the goals, and they see like not everyone, but like it may see a bother to them, but like these things are in place like for exactly this, to be able to give you the opportunity to learn and like develop yourself. So like that's I think like it's super important, and like try to get as much time and like value out of these meetings as possible, which I may not have done like myself in the past as well, but like over the time like you kind of come up to this realization that like there is some value in it.
Yeah, I mean, like, and you also, I loved what you said about, allowing people to make mistakes. You mentioned this because, you don't always have time to prevent all the mistakes and work or something, because as a manager, you won't be doing something else. But I also think that in the same is for the managers themselves. You learn a lot from your mistakes, from those, about soft skills, about things like that. And I think it's, mistakes that you have are very valuable, assuming, of course, that they are not terminal. I mean, not terminal, directly but a terminal for a company, or at least very costly. And I think that, like, I loved what you said, because, when someone, you see sometimes, especially when you are a new engineering manager and you typically have some experience, longer experience than some of the junior engineers, even in the software engineering directly, And you see that some people, they are going to make a mistake. Like you see that that's a bad approach. And you got to restrain in many cases yourself from, trying to rectify it too early. Because I think that, like, I think you hinted at it. It's like, you got to let people make those mistakes. Again, as long as they are not extremely costly or terminal for the company or the team. Because, you really learn well on things that you made, assuming that you have a feedback loop. If you did something yourself and the outcome was, was at least somewhat bad, not necessarily very bad, and you were able to see that, it's very good, it's very good teaching for you. And I even heard someone saying, I think I read it somewhere, like this story about someone saying that when I see a junior engineer doing something that might be a mistake, and this mistake is not costly, I usually let them, do it that way, because in both cases, there are two cases. Either they were right or they were wrong. In both cases, as a manager, I win. If they were wrong, they'll learn something. If they were right, I learned something. So in both cases, I won.
Yeah. I agree. And like, this part is definitely like excruciating, like, or at least like it have been for me to change the mindset, and especially like being used to do different things to kind of help the team and really make sure that it doesn't come down to any too costly things. But like, I think like if you look at it in one way, like that's like when you go to engineering manager, maybe you shouldn't even have like that much of a visibility, like to that low level. Like it's probably more applicable for the tech leads. Mm-hmm. Like in theory, like you should have like that kind of visibility. Like you have some architecture or design, but like if you have more teams, like you typically wouldn't have that much of insight into like these things like going wrong. But like, I definitely have had, but like that, for me, that's almost like an indicator. You are like looking too closely and like what's happening. Like doing it for good reasons, but like there should be other people or the team leads, and like how you have set up and build the teams, like they should see it themselves or learn about it. Like you would assume that like the team leads on the projects, like which can have like this massive impact on the whole company or whatever, like that there are some seasoned people who wouldn't really do any of those mistakes. But like the learning, like it's super important. Mm-hmm. Like that's definitely like something which I'm struggling with. Like just give the space to the people. You have mentioned as well like the feedback loop. Okay, it's like that's another skill to kind of listen to the people, like what they are saying, and encourage them to give a feedback so you can adjust your behavior and like implement some changes which would be like helpful for everyone. Just like the managers and can kind of are empowered to do the decisions and like drive the teams and everything, but like they need to make sure that like, there are very good listeners as well, so they can actually pick up like the different flavors of things which are happening, to receive feedback on their management style so they can adjust things. They can adjust their behavior like slightly when they are dealing with the different personalities of a certain team lead, so everything gets like a little bit more effective. So that's probably like another specific like soft skill for the managers. Like it's not all the managers are doing this, right? Mm-hmm. Like, but what I've mentioned before, it's about the style like which you want to have, and like some things are even natural. So like I have some things which I'm like struggling myself, especially and this kind of delegation of things and like leaving the people to do their thing and like letting them make their mistakes. It's like something which came to me like over years and years, mm-hmm. years and experience, and it's still at this point like I know like what I should do, but it's always like a struggle to let it go. So like it's not all the things like you will be able to change and control about yourself, but as long as you know, like you can adjust some other things to compensate for your behavior.
I'm smiling because it's almost like those sort of the coaching sessions that I'm that I'm hearing about. It's like what the coaches say, like most of the time people already have the answer. It's like in your case, you said, what you should do. It doesn't mean that you always do that, but if you really think introspectively about things, what you should do, right? It's almost like the coaching in terms of this classic coaching, like go to someone, tell about your problem, and they ask you about what do you think you should do about it? And you say, well, I should probably do this and this. Well, just do it. Okay. Yeah. Here is $100. Thank you. Yeah. So That is funny. But the other interesting thing in that is like, you mentioned this, these hands-on work that is still happening on the team leader side, and then you move to the engineering manager, you become less hands-on. And the question is, like, I think it's like it has its own challenges when people become engineering managers because they already have this working knowledge of the software engineering and the hands-on work. So it works a little bit for better or worse, because we mentioned also that as the pressure piles up, sometimes people, fall back onto the hands-on work. Engineering managers fall back onto the hands-on work. But it also helps because you have this understanding of the field. But then when you work, a little longer, it might be, a few years or maybe 10 years or so. I think the knowledge might become a bit rusty, like the things change. Like one thing is that you forget. The other thing is that, the environment is changing, especially these days, introduction of AI tools, things like that. The development today is not how it was like 5 years ago. And it's probably not going to be 5 years from now how it is now. And who knows, maybe the difference would be even more significant than, comparing today to 5 years ago. So how do you have any advice on how the engineering managers or manager of managers in the technology field, how do they keep their working knowledge up to date? And even if they should keep this working knowledge up to date.
Yeah. So to start with the last question, let me start with the story and like what we have been over already. So I may repeat myself a little bit, but personally, I heard just when I have entered to these team lead roles, that's fine, but engineering management role, managing multiple teams and things, I always try to contribute to the code, but we have said that's something which you shouldn't do, and I paid for that, and I paid for that by working quite a lot of time, and it's kind of having a second shift after I have done my day-to-day work with the teams and everything, and just let's look at something which I can do myself, something and a task, and to keep it was still at the time when I was programming day to day myself, so it was really easy. There wasn't, it was just keeping the muscle memory going and all those things. So that kind of worked well, but obviously you can't keep on doing this. Family comes, some different things, and you can't keep on working because you burn yourself out. And so I don't recommend it. I say what I tried and how I have set up. So I had to stop it. So I don't recommend that doing exactly this to everyone. And
because it becomes a night shift, right? When you do.
Yeah. It definitely becomes a night shift, and it distracts you as well. What's in some way it at times what we have been over, it just gives you too much of an insight into the service, which is more focused on a certain team. So you feel empowered to kind of give them some more of unsolicited feedback how things are being done, and that ends up being a little bit more of micromanagement, which then breaks not entirely, but a little bit the dynamics between the whole team and you, because they would feel you are just going and looking in their code, so maybe you don't trust them what they are building, and you want to micromanagement, and they are engineers who know what they are doing. No one likes this, that if they are tasked with something and then they have someone just to come in and review whatever they have done, and nitpicking, and as we have discussed previously, there is some solution, like you have some opinions how to do it. That doesn't necessarily mean it's always the good, like the only solution and the best solution regardless. So like that's something like to be very, very careful with. But from the background of being AC and like technologist and liking software programming, I still kind of I can't let go of like doing any of these things. But like you have to be careful. Like that brings me to the last question. Like you have had, like, does the engineering manager really have to still be current in terms of doing the actual code or whatever? Like, I think like a couple of years back I would say like yes, but like now I'm not so sure, because I understand the role like much better. It's more about like having the experience of doing that work and in generally being into the computer science and over certain amount of time. I think like it's quite funny is as well like there is a big shift with the AI and everything, but in terms of like computer science, there are patterns like which are repeating over the time, and like we kind of keep on going, like having more powerful machines, like different frameworks. Then like every couple of years there is new framework, so which does things better. But it's kind of like a spiral where we are improving and like going up, but like the same things
servers
are going
are
back and forth.
Front-end side rendering, back-end side rendering, and so on, right?
Yeah, like service-oriented architecture and SOAP and like monoliths and like then SOAP and XML and like WSDLs and schemas and like definitions. So it's great, just give it to that. It just generates the clients and servers and everything is fine. We are just working on the definitions. So it's bad, like the authentication, everything's take ages. We need something like which is quicker, faster. So here you go, like JSON, schemaless or whatever, NoSQL databases. Like that's like great, it scales so much. And now like, oh, maybe like the relation databases are not that bad and some schema is like pretty good. And like, do we have some schemas for these JSON objects? It's like, it can be like whatever garbage it is, and like it's difficult to, so Swagger comes and all this and like Smithy and ideals, and just like that's already a repeat. It's like definitely better technology, but the principles and everything, it's very, very similar. Like it has some differences for sure, but like
sure. It's a little bit different. Like that's what they say is like history doesn't repeat itself; it rhymes. So there's like it's a different, but it's sort of in the same direction.
And then like when you have done those things and like you have some sort of analogy which is not completely like exact, there are differences, but like you can understand like very well of what's going on, like. And then like synchronous and like asynchronous way of doing things, like messages and like and queues, like they were message brokers like before like Kinesis and Kafka and all these like message logs. Like Oracle have been using them like in between their databases and like it's kind of reusing the same technologies, like making them slightly better, coming up with different approaches and different patterns, but you can always then build up for the fundamentals which you have acquired over the years. So I think there is some specific amount of you keeping yourself current of how the technology develops, and if there are like these big shifts as the AI and like how that impacts, how that would impact actually the work and the developer's experience, how you can utilize it to make it better. Like what are the feedback on different languages, on developing languages, because like being current on the technology stack, I think it's like super important from the responsibilities which we have been talking about, what the engineering manager does. So like if you need to plan the resourcing, like if you need to pick up the people and the development team and like different roles, like it may be your responsibility depending on the size of the organization. It's like even what languages are being used, even though it matters less and less, but then it impacts the pool of the developers you can hire from, how expensive they would be, what's the availability, what's even the status of the language or whatever. Is there enough like people like supporting it, writing it, maintaining it, so like that technology which you have chosen will not die, and then like you would have to replace it, all those things. So certain level of keeping yourself up to speed is definitely important, but I don't think like it necessarily means that it has to be like on the code level, like writing code and being able to deliver code. Like definitely that means like it's a big choice in a career, and like it may take some time to change that career. Like the more time you spend in engineering management role without like touching any coding, it would make like much more complicated to come back to some role which is more closer to the individual contributor side. But I think like it's entirely possible, and it really depends on the engineering manager like flavor. So like you spending some time in that role, if you want to go back or whatever, you would have some time to boot up something. But like it really depends how strong software engineer and developer like you have been before. But then it's entirely possible just to come back completely. So I still like, what I keep saying, like it's individual. Like I haven't stopped myself like doing something, but like I wouldn't like use that as a recommendation. Like in general, it's more about like being so passionate about like what I'm doing. So I still like kind of use some small projects or hobby project or something like for friends to find some time as a hobby like throughout the course of the week, so I can do something and I can still program because it's something which brings me an immense joy. So just steering over a different question again a little bit. So like that's a different, like it's a big mind shift for the engineering manager of being not able like how to measure the success and how to understand like it being successful. Because when you are an individual contributor, you do some code, it just works, and you get like an immediate feedback and like some sort of satisfaction that you have done something, and it's fairly fulfilling. So for the engineering manager, it's kind of setting up the mindset, and like generally in the middle, for the middle managers, like if you do the actual work like which you can see in front of you, it gets like, in a way, if you were used to doing that, it gets less rewarding in some way, like being the manager. So you have to set yourself like these goals as well, about like did we deliver it on time, did someone got promoted, did like the projects were successful and like brought as much of revenue to the company, and kind of celebrate those wins for the teams to motivate it, but like for yourself as well, because like that's the main value like which you are bringing to the company, and it's like the biggest reward is something like coming to you and like really be grateful about all the leadership and mentorship like you have provided him as an individual. Like that's what I see, like it's an important thing to think about. So going back to the original question, which was like how you keep yourself current. So outside of this, like really nipping in some programming, but it's a little bit extreme. It really depends on the individual, and I don't think it's required. So like that's kind of personal choice how much time you have left. But then definitely like newsletters and like consuming all the stuff like which is currently on the internet, right? Like podcasts. Yeah, I have mentioned like the Pragmatic Engineer, TLDR, the newsletter. So I do that. Like there is quite a lot of content. It's probably like impossible to consume all that.
I have just like 400 newsletter each is waiting in my inbox.
You have some rating systems, right? So like the interesting stuff for like people, like things which are being discussed or talked about, like come up. So like if you have a limited time, you just go for the ones like which come up, and with Reddit, and like quite a lot of the communities are like somewhere, and you find the right space if you want to follow up like with Scala or things like that. So that's super useful. And I think like then going on conferences, like development focused, like kind of hardcore developer focused. So that like depends. But I don't think like it's only an opportunity for like business development, because like for people in those roles, like it could be like the conferences are quite often like business development opportunities, but like listening to some of those talks which are in there to see like where the technology is moving, what the plans with some specific language, what the people are doing, like how that works. I think like it's pretty good source if you can find the time and like really savor the conference and like consume the content which is there at the time you are there. So I was failing usually with that as well, like going on a conference, like half working on that. It like doesn't really work that well if you really find time to go on a conference. Just try to use it on investing into yourself and like the technology and like updating your mental model of the technology and to keep yourself more current. And then like on the coding and programming into that, I still think like there are so great courses for different languages or whatever. So like time to time new language comes around or it becomes a little bit more popular. It's like super easy, like throughout the week or a couple of weeks, just do a course to refresh yourself, and like that will like make you really current, and like it comes back like very, very quickly. And like if you do that like frequently, and if you plan some sort of schedule of things to do, then I don't think like you may not get as rusty as you would think as an engineering manager, but it's still something to be done more on a personal time.
Sure. I mean, like there's I think a lot of CTOs or engineering managers are doing this. Like even if there is not a they cannot participate or contribute to the core projects that are a core product they are building. There are often plenty of opportunities, as you said, for some smaller apps, like for management. Maybe you want to have a one-on-one app, which where you can store notes with your reportee, and then you can have the next one-on-one and you can look at it. So many different things, many different small tools that you can make, and even with the introduction of AI tooling, I think it's simpler than it was in the past.
Yeah. Like you can as well like go into some like code reviews and like reading the code and like helping debugging. I think kind of what keeps, or at least like me, interested, like building some dashboards on over the services like which my teams are managing, so I have like higher level view if everything is healthy, and I can look and like quickly find out if something is wrong, which kind of helps with the support, like identifying the errors. So and like understanding if the services really performs, and like I don't see it as a control function, but like it's always like better to have some sort of visibility on like what's happening where.
Yeah, and after all, you mentioned that the control function, and you mentioned these people don't like when you assess performance, and there are two levels of performance, the team level and the individual one. And I think like people sort of understand this team level performance, but also individual performance in a way. I mean, after all, some people report to you in a way. In a classical structure, you are they are your subordinates in a way. So you sort of like, if we imagine the worst situation when the shit hits the fan, and as there is for any reason layoffs in the organization, someone will come to you as an engineering manager and ask you, we need to shed off some people, and you point me in your team who that person should be. And you better have in your mind, I mean not instantly, but you better have in your mind some source of the performance comparison, and you better have this performance comparison as much, you don't want to have it to be biased because you like something. You would really like to have a clear picture of the performance, even on the individual level. After all, it's not a fun part of the work, but it is part of the work.
Yeah. I agree. Like that's was like it's another of the HR responsibilities, and yeah, like it may happen, as you said, like it happened in the past, and like these tough choices have to be made. Like even like firing someone eventually, that's kind of an interesting experience to go through, and like you have to prepare and train yourself for that. So yeah, it's part of the job, and like has to be dealt with, and that's definitely something which doesn't come naturally, like for software engineers or whatever. Like that's kind of pure management.
And often there are some legal consequences, so you got to be trained on that, because sometimes it's the word that you say that you shouldn't have said and things like that, depending on the contracts and the country. But yeah, as you said, it's a serious thing. Like no one likes to do it, and hopefully we won't need to do it anytime in the future. But realistically speaking, if we have another 20 years or something, or 30 years of our careers, it's probably going to happen at some point. So you got to be prepared, especially if you got to be aware when you are starting as the engineering manager that it might be the case, and it'll likely be the case, if you spend enough time in this position. So yeah, you need to think about it. So, but it's an interesting also topic about, about the size of the team. And I think what I'm trying to say is that I think that, in pandemic or pre-pandemic, so there was years when, basically the tech industry was on the rise. And then we had 2022 when the layoffs started and things like that, and companies started to optimize in various ways. But before that, I think it was the case was that, some people said that it's the ideal ratio is to having one engineering manager for say 5-6 people. And then, obviously the big companies, big tech, started to doing huge rounds of layoffs. Like it might have been, 5 or, few percent or even 2%. But, for those companies having hundreds of thousands of employees, there were thousands of people. And it, one of the areas when it hit for certain companies, I think it was MedUp, but also other companies too, that they specifically targeted, management. And I see sort of it like, including engineering managers, I sort of see some rationale into it. Like if you have 6 people, in your team, probably you can still make it. If you have, 7 or 8 people, maybe even 9, if for it might be suboptimal. It might be unsustainable for a long period of time, but for some period of time is doable. So I'm wondering, if you think that's a trend that is going to continue, or do you think it's gonna be revert back to these 5 or 6 people depending on the organization? That also includes the changes, I think, apart from the economy, the changes in the tooling that we have, things like AI. So my question is, what is your opinion, the ideal ratio of individual contributors to engineering manager? And the other thing is, do you think that it's gonna change for various reasons, but for instance because of the introduction of various AI tools?
The team size, like generally, I think like for the engineering managers, and like I think for me the good size was always like 5 to 6 people for a team. Like we can discuss and argue about like the difference like between the team lead and engineering manager and what we have been talking about. But like for me, it's still like the best like kind of size of a unit to operate with, and like that's I would like to have with my teams. Mm-hmm. But it's similar. I think like it's a good number of people which person can manage and like have a strong relationships with. So like that kind of comes if you step up and it a little bit higher, if you have this more hierarchical structure, that you have an engineering manager with up to 6 team, each team has a team lead, so you have around like 5 to 6 like direct reports for you. But like then indirect it can go higher. So like I still think like that works very well. Like historically I have operated within those teams over the course of time. Then I have moved on like the one layer up, and it was like 2-3 teams. So that kind of worked well. And like for me, it's really like the skill sets on like what we have discussed already. in like building the relationship and trust and like the control. And it's like it's a really very different like mode of operation. I think and yeah, like why all these things like came about, because there was like this overhiring period, and then like if you have new hires, they take some time to kind of be embedded into the teams, like kind of realize what the culture of the business, how they are operating, how the team works. So they need like quite a lot of support. So it makes sense that this shift has happened like in those recent years, and now like we are coming slowly like back into different numbers. Like for some of these like big tech companies and corporations where there is like 20 or 40 directs, I think like that may not work as well in terms of retention of the people. So it's like very high profile like big tech companies which probably like hire the best talent, like highly motivated and ambitious people who are self-driven. So like that can work in certain way, but I think, and like based on the data which I have seen, like the retention, it's not very low, and like these people kind of jump between these bigger companies. So I think like it's a viable way of doing business and like make that work, and it really depends on what the companies like would be optimizing for. So like if still they have like this much of pool of a talent, in some way it feels to me like that it's okay for them to manage them this way and like burn them a little bit and like replace them quickly, or like take them from some other company. So it may be more cost effective, it makes the business like go faster, but it's probably not sustainable, and like the people don't like to work like that over a long course of time. So makes sense for me, like, but I don't think like not every company can afford like doing this, and because it just wouldn't be attractive as much. It's probably like related to the compensation and the purpose of like what
not everyone can afford to pay big tech monies, right? So they are
exactly. So like you have to, part of the deal have to be like different sort of compensation, right, in terms of like effort and like how they treat you, and some like other benefits, the progress, and like kind of climbing the ladder as we have been talking about. Like I can imagine that outside of the things which I have said, like if you have those bigger teams and like even like 40 teams, like, and we have talked about the work of the engineering manager, like not as much about the tech lead, but like this coordination, facilitation, like helping the teams to come up with a consensus, because it's not always like this, but like in those kind of setups, I prefer to have like self-contained teams who kind of work independently and are enabled by this independence, but they are usually like very opinionated about how to do certain things and like what their service and like the services which they might should and shouldn't do, and then there are some like negotiations and meditations and quite a lot of work like on these big projects and big corporations. It's spent in those discussions on or like finding what the consensus and like how the APIs like should look like, rather than like the actual implementation. It's like kind of straightforward and like the engineers can do it. So like that's where I see the benefit of this like higher team of like having like 40 people and like one engineering manager who is much more technical, and then like having the like, it's kind of in some way some sort of like dictatorship. So you kind of are much freer in terms of like reassigning people working on the different things and like moving them around, giving much more direction. And I think it's possible to be effective in this setup, but it's super demanding for the engineering manager as well. I think like it has to be like super strong person, definitely needs to be current, probably does part like not necessarily code, but like has to have like even more understanding, and like it's kind of more of a technical lead with like a little bit of management.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of the team lead role almost, like not necessarily with the code.
By the way, that's I've been told that's how NVIDIA is being run. I think Jensen Huang has 40 direct reportees. But you are very right. I think that whatever people, what people say basically about him, that he's, even though that he's CEO of a huge company, he's very, very much into details. And he worked like 100 hours a week or so. It's like he works all the time.
Yeah, so like that's the trade-off. So like that's like going to, on your other question, like what's the future? Like I think like that's too much. I think like that's a certain way of doing things for a certain companies who can afford it, but like that the middle companies, like I'm not so sure that like people in general like would be willing in that setup, because I still think like even if you will apply this and like there are no official team leads or no like not the middle layer between the 40 people, I still think like people as we are, like they would form some sort of like smaller teams and groups of people who either like to work together, work on the same things, because it's not like everyone is interchangeable, like, and within that group there would be a senior engineer or whatever, which would be like the unofficial team lead or something like that. So it's in some way like it may be like even cheeky. So like the hierarchy, the given hierarchy is not there is not the role or anything. But I still think like that the people will form the hierarchy, and like that's generally how it is. Like, but I have no data to back this up or whatever, but like that's what I think like would happen, that there would be someone who will be like more vocal and would like to assume the reins. Obviously, if in a super competitive environment, they can keep on like constantly clashing, and it would take them. So like you need specific type of people for this with like very, very specific mindset, so they are able to do things independently, but on the other hand, like they are able to come up with some consensus between the other people, and they wouldn't have the team lead or 5 people to kind of babysit them and mediate them as much if you have like one person for 40 people.
Yeah, it's like and maybe is what you're saying. It sounds like it's almost a humane thing, not a technical thing. Like it comes from the human nature, right? That there is a limited number of people that you can really form a coherent group with. It's like this Dunbar number, if I recall it correctly. It's like, I think we have those, Facebook accounts or LinkedIn, God forbid, LinkedIn, where you have like 5,000 people who are, but realistically, you don't know 90% of them. You probably, some people didn't even see that, right? Those 90% of people. Like I know some people who have this rule that I can only add you to the LinkedIn if we shake hands together, which I see it makes it a bit more real, but it's still like it's not people who you really work with, who you really know. It still is the same as it was 20 years ago. You have a group of maybe 5 people that you really, really trust on a personal level, then maybe you have 20 people or something in the organization that you really work with, right?
Yeah, exactly. So like that's kind of tricky. And like I was talking about retention, so it's even like hiring some sort of junior developers or like a little bit more junior people. Like does it really work, or like are they this kind of juniors like which are so excellent that they are not really junior people, that like they are like lacking the skills of like working within the teams, and maybe like a little bit of experience, just like some sort of level of juniority. But what I mean is like they don't necessarily need as much support, because there wouldn't be that much support provided, or like who is like providing this support in this setup, like the engineering manager, like fair enough, but like how many like junior people you can then onboard like within the team, because they would need like some substantial support, or they would have some mentors selected from a given team, and they will be working with it and maybe with 2 other people, so they will form like this unofficial team as well. Like that's my view on it, that it's kind of interesting way of doing things, but saying like it's much more empowering for for the engineering manager, and sometimes like I can see like the benefits of it. Like sometimes like the not necessarily evil, but like the mastermind like who pulling the strings and like can have the last say. Like it's a little bit more effective. Like if you have like, let's say, a little bit more of a dictator who would say like things then will get done in a certain way, so you don't spend like too much time deciding things.
Yeah, sure. And in IT, you have smart people. They can argue, and they are smart. They are eloquent, and as IT people, we can discuss things, with no end because everyone is so eloquent. And for everything, there are always some perspectives. It rarely things are black and white. There's always some shades of gray. So those discussions, I think it's an important thing. I think that some companies, like there's this famous thing from Amazon, disagree and commit. They sort of embedded this thing into the organization culture that at some point we got to stop, and we need to have some ways of going forward with the decision that not everyone really agrees with, but we still need to go on somehow.
And even the disagreement, it's right, and like that's the tough part, because the people like who have the counter arguments, they are right as well, but like it may easily be like that there is no better solution. So like you have to weigh the trade-offs and like pick the one, like keep on going and like provide the value, and then over time even change it. So like that's big for me as well, like going from the background of the bank or whatever, like which I have started, like there was like always a year of planning or writing documents and things and like designing, and then like we started the work, and like there was this technical document which was describing what actually has been done, and it was like 80% different than what has been spent. Like the requirements were fulfilled, but like the implementation or like plan for the implementation or whatever, like that kind of went through the bin. So like to me it's kind of get better at execution, and then like you can always change the decisions. Like there would be some cost to that for sure, but like what's the cost of waiting too long, like making that decision and doing nothing, because you can find yourself like doing nothing, then be outdone by your competition or whatever, and like and it's finished, right? So
that's difficult. That's difficult because that's tough, because even if you that's we talk about the making decisions as teams, but it's also the other side of the story when you make this decision. And obviously for any more complicated decisions, there are gonna be some people that won't agree with it, and we have this disagree and commit, like we mentioned this from Amazon, for instance, and many companies. But I have this feeling that in many organizations, it's almost like, say, this is the 100% of the effort that you can give for a given thing. And sometimes if you don't agree with something, you say, well, I don't agree, I'll still do it because they tell me to do it, but I'm probably gonna do half-baked effort. And I think what is happening in many organizations is like, unless the organization has a really solid grasp on how things go, which is like, I think 90% of organizations don't have. And it's like, it's enough to have some important people or key people, and that don't have to be necessarily, VPs or, some directors. It can be some key contributors who don't feel that it's a really good decision. They sort of agree to it, but they give a half-baked effort. And I think what happens is like when enough people give 60% effort, this thing is not ever gonna be successful. And then they come back and say like, you see, well, we did it, what you wanted to do, but it doesn't work. So, we told you so, at the very beginning that it's not a good idea, but we sort of committed. And I think that it all boils down to, how do you motivate people? How do you keep people motivated? And I think that is also an interesting angle in that. Do you have any recipe or guidelines for engineering managers, how they could keep people motivated?
I think like it comes like from the methodologies, and we have touched upon some of these things, like frequent meetings, and like one-to-ones, and trying to over-communicate of the things like which are happening with the company, and like discuss things about the roadmaps. Even like discussing some of the interesting technical developments like in the AI space and new technologies which can be utilized within the organization. So like that kind of keep yourself as a current, and like encourage people to do some introductions on things as well. So kind of keep them interested and like share the love for tech and things, and like give them some space where they can express themselves outside of just the sole work for the company, because it like brings quite a lot of joy. Like one of the popular things is like having these company hackathons as well. So like people get fairly excited about it, like can come up with ideas. Then some of those ideas can even be taken on, and some projects like can be spun up out of that if it was some feature which the products to kind of, it empowers the engineers to pick up the product people basically and come up with some things and like kind of influence back. So I think like that's a great thing. Then generally I like some sort of demos, which depends like what the cadence is. So where the different teams like which you manage can show like what they have built to the other teams, and it just depends like how you frame it really. So it can be just internal, not as much for outsiders, but like internally it's sharing what the other teams are doing, because then obviously that motivates the other people within the company. Like someone like does something great, then they would want to be like doing and compete with the others and show that what they are worth. And like obviously like these are the like things which you can do, but then it's within the company communication as well, like being super transparent about like what is being done, kind of give the credit to people for what they are doing. And for me, like I am really big on kind of distributing the credit to the specific teams or people who are helping me to come up with some design solutions. Kind of always like mention the people who have helped with that, or the teams like specifically, and like give them good feedback. I think like it's super important, like basically celebrate any of those wins and making sure that these individuals or these teams were essential in doing certain things. So like that's super helpful. Obviously like giving some feedback, some honest feedback. We talk about the radical candor about if something is not right, like it's the like kind of the worst thing to not provide the feedback that something is not happening like exactly how you like it, and not have a conversation about that. And at some point, like it may end up in a disaster or be demotivating for the people.
So that's
because
where
if they are not
emotional intelligence comes into play, right?
Yeah. So like you need to give the feedback. So and then like the emotional intelligence, like it depends, right? Like it depends on the person. Like a little bit of negative feedback means motivation for someone. It can destroy someone. So like that's kind of understanding and having those skills and like how to serve that feedback. It's like a motivational tool for the teams, because like some people, you tell them like they have done something wrong, it will like fire them up with a little bit of spite and anger. Like I know like many people who kind of work on spite and like I will show you like I can do much better, but like you have to be careful about like utilizing like those emotions, right, and things, and like and different things, different people works differently. So like it's like it's definitely like I'm not saying like pitting the teams against each other, because then it comes like to those discussions which then promotes like indecisiveness and like fights over like how things should be done. So like you still have to be like super careful, but like that's another like motivational thing which I think should be used quite a lot. Just let me think what else comes to mind.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you said about these, you don't want to set teams against themselves, because like it might be a competition, might be a powerful motivator, but at the end of the day, we work most of the time at the same organization in terms of our, context of our conversation, being an engineering manager. And even though it sometimes work in a short period of time. I think it's a long period of time is detrimental. You still need to have, and it's difficult sometimes because it's easy to, in many cases, to set up this, this maybe not incentives, but this culture of that we are against the old things, against the legacy. We are building something new. We are good. They are bad. It's a powerful motivator, but I don't think that it's a good motivator in the long run. Like at the end of the day, you are still the same company, right? You are trying to achieve the same goal.
Yeah. Like it was like that's what I meant. Like with the demos or anything. Like kind of, I didn't mean it in the way, like, because typically if you have some legacy teams or something, like there is slightly different reporting structure. So it's more like within the teams, like you manage, and you can say like, look, like this team, like it's so great. They have done this implementation, like it's worked so well, and like kind of use that mainly like pitting the teams, like you manage, like just kind of showing them like, look how this one is good, like. Yeah. Maybe you should do something similar or like a little bit better in that way. I think like what you are saying, like it's very relevant in terms of in big corporations and like going into some sort of fusions of companies or mergers. Like this is
super difficult. Yeah, because these are different cultures, different organizations. You are now in the same boat, but it's like I think I read somewhere that. I'm not entirely sure if most of the mergers, but a significant part of them are not really successful in the long run. And I think that it has to do with technology, obviously, and how you merge stuff with different companies. But I think that most of it comes from the culture. It's not like that you can mold existing company with a history somehow to this new setting, and it's very difficult.
Yeah, it's always like painful process. I would say like for most of the people involved, but like it has to be done. Like you always have to have, like that's probably like the biggest challenge which I have faced so far, and like how to navigate it. Like you have these like views where you have to like behave like some conqueror, and like and there are some like legacy teams and like new things are being built, and you have to eliminate like everyone like from the legacy and just replace it by the new teams. So like that's kind of extreme, and like that's something which I wholeheartedly disagree with, but it sometimes like it makes some logical reason as well, because then like you eliminate all these discussion and clashes. Even I know like it's tough thing to say that I have some understanding of like why some fusions like go like this, and like when there is some sort of replatforming happening the other way, it's just kind of trying to coexist and merge the teams together, but like then like that's super difficult. So you have different software development life cycles, different types of people. Usually the culture is like very, very different as well. And just like to tie everything together, I think like it's very good. Like if there is a strong leadership, like giving direction, there is like plenty stuff to build. But if the company like struggles itself as well, it's like what's the next big thing? And like that they are kind of keep on buying these other companies and trying to include them in what they are doing, but like they are not building as much of new stuff, and everything is just like merging things together, try to figure out what service can be like decommissioned and like only one utilized, so things are more efficient. Then it's really difficult situation to be in for the engineers, because it's not really as building new stuff. It's like kind of standing their ground and saying like our stuff should stay, and then it like everything becomes like slightly different, and like it takes the joy out of building things and the true software engineering. It's much more like management.
So Michal, listen, I would love to have, like, we didn't even run through maybe half of the questions that I had in my mind. So I have still, many more questions, but I also know that you have other responsibilities now with your, recently expanded family. So I don't want to take you, too much of your time. But last question, if you were sort of to sum up these, the conversation that we had, if you were to give, 2-3 sentences of advice for a new engineering manager or team leader, then generally technology leader, what would it be?
Yeah, so I think like most important thing for my point of view, it's like the working on the communication skills, like, and understand that like the main part of the job would be like listening, talking, persuading people, like that would be like majority of the things, like in some way, like part of the job, it's kind of being like a psychologist for your people and like working with people and talking with them. So just try to read some literature and prepare yourself mentally for that. And depends on your style, but I still think like that's the part of the job, because like you are there for your directs to help them out, to deal with any problems they have, and like to enable them to do their work correctly. Mm-hmm. So just like focus on the delegation and execution being done by the teams and the people you report, and like kind of looking from the outside and what's happening, because then like that way you would get the best results and you will allow them to grow. And then some of these recommendations which I am having, it's like what I have found out to be best from my experience, but like that doesn't necessarily mean that everything what I have said, it's the universal solution for everything. So everyone is individual. So from you going into a role of engineering manager, it's like about finding yourself, what the leadership style you want to have, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, improving the weaknesses, and just kind of, it's quite a lot of work to take on yourself to improve yourself and incorporate the feedback from the people to be successful in that. So that's what I feel interesting. It's because you are there to enable the growth of the other people, while you have to accept that you are growing as well. Mm-hmm. To be up to the job.
Great advice. Listen, Michal, it was very, very great to have you here. I enjoyed the conversation immensely. Thank you for showing up and having this conversation.
Thank you very much for like inviting me and like being part of this new podcast series. Like it's definitely like an additional step in what we are doing, and hopefully we will talk about something else in the future, and like this series will become immensely successful. So like I have enjoyed talking to you, and yeah, I'm really grateful for being here.
It was a pleasure. I am excited too, and as I said, I think we barely scratched the surface. So I'm hoping to have another chance to talk with you. So thank you again, and see you next time.
Okay, thank you.